The minute I meet Damien, my face lights up. I mean, that's true, it lights up. And the point about it is this, you can say what you like to him. Now, he doesn't always agree with you.
You can make this town look so kind now.
It feels amazing to make someone feel amazing. Volunteer with Alone. Find out more at alone.ie/volunteer.
In your house there by the sea.
Welcome to Get Over It, the Consciousness Transforming Podcast for exceptional 21st century living. Folks, we're going to be speaking to Ronnie Pontiac today, and we're talking about his book, American Metaphysical Religion, Esoteric and Mystical Traditions of the New World. And folks, this is a book that gives you a lot of history, but it's not like that boring stuff that we read back in, high school and college. It's very engaging and it's very truthful. So it might contradict something that you've learned, but this book holds the truth. It's a thick book. So get it so that you can finish it over the summer and just enjoy it and enrich yourself while you're reading. Now, the information shared on Get Over It uses intuitive and pragmatic insight to help you shift your consciousness to break through the blocks and release energy that is no longer needed. Yes, we're going to help you let go of the BS that's been holding you back. But you guys know I always ask, are you truly ready to? And by the way, folks, BS is belief system. A bit about me for my new listeners: intuitive since birth. I'm a third generation intuitive with over 3 decades of experience supporting people to break through the blocks along their path. I'm a strategist for personal and professional transformation, revealing cutting edge information that enables you to prosper and thrive. I spent 25 successful years in corporate America as an executive sales professional. I am the founder of Healing Visions Ministries and the Northern California Children's Education Network, a 501c3 nonprofit. I provide consultations and healings in all areas of life that heal the mind, body, spirit connection, allowing you to live your very best life. My clients say that I keep it real while providing them with accurate information to assist them along their journey as a spirit living a human existence. But they also say, if you really don't want to know, don't ask Monique. My background includes a doctorate in metaphysics, Reiki master teacher, ordained minister, and clinical hypnotherapist. So whether you are stressed, depressed, or possessed, I can help. To find out more about me and the services I offer, go to my website, and that's MoniqueChapman.com. And I invite you to like and follow me on Facebook and LinkedIn. Folks, don't look on Twitter no more because girl's been gone from there for quite a while. My guest today, Ronnie Pontiac, worked as Manly P. Hall's research assistant, screener, and designated substitute lecturer for 7 years. He has produced award-winning documentaries, has written for the Invisible College magazine, Utopia, Metapsychosis, Occult of Personality, and the original Reality Sandwich. He's also the founding member and primary guitarist for Lucid Nation, and he lives in Los Angeles. And if you want to check him out, just go to the website, go to the web, I should say, and put in Ronnie Pontiac, RONNIE-PONTIAC, and you can see everything this wonderful, glorious man has done. Welcome, Ronnie.
Oh, thank you so much. And what a wonderful introduction.
you. Absolutely love the book. As I said, it's full of history, but it's an easy read and it's engaging. I love Stephen King, and it's not scary like Stephen King, although some of our history may be.
Yes.
But you really get the facts out there, and facts that, I think few people are willing to recognize today. So let's start off with, what is American metaphysical religion?
There's a debate about that. It's a new academic field of research that just born in the last 10 years. And what happened was, for many generations in religious studies, the only things that were worth looking at were big institutionalized religions that were thought to have shaped civilization. And no one looked at the smaller streams of both Christianity, but also of alternative spiritual paths. They were just considered irrelevant. But there was a revolution that occurred in academia that started in the 80s and continued slowly through the 90s, but really picked up speed in the 2000s and 2010s, where the idea was that all of this should be studied. It shouldn't be judged. There shouldn't be any sense that we have to filter. We just want to accurately report what people did and what they believed. And so this is not only about America, but it affected studies of esoteric history all over the world. And it's really quite thrilling if you're into that kind of thing. So this book is based on the research that came out about America. And it reveals just a very different kind of history than we thought we had. Mm-hmm. So some people say that American metaphysical religion is just a kind of umbrella term for a bunch of unrelated superstitions that's convenient to use. Other people say, and argue, I think persuasively, that it is actually a set of beliefs that in very deep ways resemble each other. The practices and the details of the beliefs may differ, but they all have so many similarities, and they all have grown up together since the very earliest days when no one was here from Europe except traders and occasional pirates and fishermen, and continued through every point of the history of the country, sometimes very influential, sometimes very visible. And all along, there's this hybrid being created as people from all over the world are running into each other, and they're sharing their beliefs and their dreams and finding differences and similarities and then adapting them and inventing something new. And this has been going on here for centuries, really.
Hmm. Well, what is metaphysical religion? Because when I first saw the book title, it's like, I don't do organized religion. And blessings to everyone who does, because everybody has their own path, okay? So there's no judgment there. But why do you call it metaphysical religion?
That, again, is an academic term. It's funny because it doesn't really go with the definition of metaphysical in English. It goes more with the idea of metaphysical in, let's call it New Age slang. And there it's more of a metaphor, and it means above the physical, in other words, spiritual. And back in the day, in the 60s through, I guess, into the 90s, there were a lot of metaphysical bookshops, is what everybody would call them, or metaphysical stores. And they would have crystals and books and every kind of thing that you couldn't find anywhere else. So that term in academia came to be used to distinguish organized religions from this other thing that is about that metaphysical metaphor, the New Age metaphor of a bunch of people who are sort of unrelated, unorganized, and yet all seem to believe the same kind of thing, and they call that thing metaphysical religion. So there's also European metaphysical religion, for example.
Oh, okay. You met Manly P. Hall as a child, and you've worked with him for many, many years. Tell the audience who Manly P. Hall was in your very special connection to him.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I love to talk about him. He was a great human being. He's an author in the area of esoteric studies, and I think a great figure in American metaphysical religion. His most famous book is called The Secret Teachings of All Ages, but he wrote countless pamphlets and books and delivered, I believe, over 1,000 lectures, if not thousands. And he used to, for decades, every Sunday in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles, give lectures at 11 a.m. for $1. And
Wow.
and they were all 90 minutes long with no notes, and fascinating and brilliant and filled with detail, even when he was at an advanced age. And so his influence is, there's one academic, for example, who argues that he may be the biggest influence on West Coast American metaphysical religion from the 20s all the way up until we get the big explosion of interest in these matters in the 1960s. He started a place called the Philosophical Research Society, this beautiful little cluster of sort of pinkish amber buildings that are mostly Mayan influenced in terms of architecture, but have Egyptian details here and there. And there's a big library that's just gorgeous, filled with esoteric books, and a vault with rare books, the rarest of which have now been a long time ago removed to the Getty Museum. But when I was there, they were still at the library. And there was his big office, which was filled with beautiful carved Chinese furniture, including Japanese altar, and there was a gift shop, a little thing, and an auditorium, where he would lecture, but also others would, and then a little upstairs lecture room for weeknight lectures. So this was like a community in LA for several generations for people. And it was this beautiful oasis that hardly anybody knew about. People often talk about driving by it many, many times and seeing it and wondering what it was, but never bothering to come in. Although it had a little sign on it that says that people were welcome to come in. And so I didn't know anything about it. I found him through the Secret Teachings book. I found an old copy of it in a used bookstore, the Bodhi Tree, another kind of metaphysical oasis. And there I found all this enlightening information that changed my whole view of the world and of life. And then a friend of mine told me that he was still lecturing, although he was already at an advanced age. And I thought, wow, I should go listen to him. But I also was afraid to, because I had lived a pretty rotten life the last couple of years and had gotten into petty criminal activities and was involved with violent people. And I was afraid to be seen for who I was by such noble people. But my girlfriend, who later became my wife and who wrote a book about our friendship with him, Tamara, she said to me, "How will you feel if you don't go and he passes and you've never heard him? And come on, let's let's go. This is a blessing that we can do this." And so we did go, and I had an extraordinary experience, which many other people also reported having. I, at the time, was very paranoid about earthquakes. I had a friend, the one who told me that he was still lecturing, who was deeply into Edgar Cayce and was convinced that California was going to fall off into the sea any minute. And she was moving to Virginia Beach. And I was considering going because she had spooked me. Well, he looked right at me and he said, "People who suffer fear of natural disasters because of their guilt over how they have lived their lives." And then the same thing happened with Tamara, by the way, in a different way. And so we just, at that point, wanted to have something to do with him. Now, an interesting thing about that was that I found out later when I worked for him that he couldn't see us. His vision was pretty bad by that point. So he was feeling somehow intuitively, or he was just so in the flow, that he would do this regularly with people, just happen to look right at them and then deliver this message, some kind of 4D thing or channeling, or I don't know. There's so many potential explanations, but whatever it was quite magical. So I wanted to volunteer, so did Tamara, and we went down the next day to volunteer. And they interviewed us, and they really liked her because she had a lot of office skills, but they didn't really like me because I didn't have anything but skills that were useless. And so they called and said they would like her to come work.
Mhm.
And I was the kind of person that said, no, I'm not staying at home while you go over and work there. You know, if they don't want me, then forget it. But a day later, they called and they said, you happened to mention that you grew up around several European languages. Well, Manly Hall would like to speak with you about that. Mind blowing. Manly Hall wants to speak to me. So
For
I
me.
went down, yeah. So I went down there the next morning, and boy, was I nervous. And I was so clean cut. I looked so sharp. And they showed me to the door, and I walked in, and he was sitting behind this ornate carved Chinese desk, really beautiful. And he looked at me, and there was these four women, two on either side of him, elderly women who were standing there with folded arms, giving me the skunk eye. And he said in this funny kind of W.C. Fields Barrymore voice, "Come on in and make yourself." What was it? No. Come in and sit down and make yourself miserable. So I sat down. Now he had a big stack of paper in front of him, and he pushed it toward me. And he explained that it was the galley of his alchemical bibliography, and that he wanted me to work with him on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I don't, you clearly have mistaken me for someone else, because I don't know anything about any of those things. And that's way past, I'm not even that well educated. And he said, no, nonsense. You'll do fine. Okay, well, I picked it up. I was really confused. I did not think, I figured this must be a mistake. And sure enough, the vice president of the society came running around the side of the library and grabbed the papers from me and said, that was a mistake. And so I thanked her, and I said, thank you. Yeah, I think it was too.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I got home that afternoon, I got another phone call, and it was his secretary. And she said, Manly Hall, his office, 9 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
So
No mistake there.
right, exactly. So I come back, and it's just him now.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, I want you to understand that I believe you can do this. I will help you to do it. In the morning, I will let you know what I think you should be working on. We can have lunch together in the vault so that you can look at the things, the alchemical manuscripts and books, and you can pick them up, and I'll tell you about them, and you can ask me questions. And then in the afternoon, I'll look over your work, and I'm sure you'll do fine. And in the future, you are to only do what I tell you to do. If anybody contradicts what I tell you to do, you come to me and tell me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, the offer of just the idea that I could sit in the vault with him and have lunch and look at those books that made up the secret teachings of all ages, and ask him questions, and I had to do it. And also I was so moved that he was going to give me a chance like that I could be around this paragon of wisdom, and we became friends, and I became his research assistant and his screener, and I would take over for lectures when he didn't feel up to it. And he was just this wonderfully kind, tranquil, funny, really funny guy, often taught through jokes.
Mm-hmm.
And he had this brilliant mind that when I was working for him in his early 80s, he could tell me, like, go get me the book on the second floor on the northwest corner on the second shelf. It's got a red cover. I mean, he had this, I guess, photographic memory, and it was amazing to watch him work. He was the ultimate multitasker. He would be working on 2 or 3 books and on journal articles and giving lectures and doing his quarterly or yearly astrology readings and prognostications, and meeting with people, and then keeping the business of this place going. It was beautiful. to be around. And it was a beautiful time, an amazing place. I think that we were there at the right time. And before that, there were very important people that used to come there. I just don't know if we ever would have had a chance. But when we got there, it was mellowed and very homey, and just kind of older people hanging out together who loved the esoteric, and they were delighted to see a couple young people who had an interest in it, and so they took us under their wing.
That is wonderful. I mean, what a great way to be immersed in this information and to learn at basically your own pace. I mean, that sounded absolutely fabulous. Now, talk to us about the impact of the Rosicrucians on America and religion and metaphysics.
Okay, that's fascinating. It's such a mysterious subject. No one's even sure who wrote the Rosicrucian manifestos that started the whole thing. No one is sure if Christian Rosenkreuz, the alleged founder, was anything more than a myth. Most people think that it was a creative fancy. And there's some scholars these days who are arguing that rather than the traditional, let's call it theosophical, but it was very much a part of the whole metaphysical mythology at one point, the idea that the Rosicrucians were invisible masters, or that they were some sort of a secret organization of initiates, has somewhat fallen to the wayside. And it appears that what produced the manifestos was some professors in mostly Germany who were influenced by the writing of people like Giordano Bruno, who was burned at the stake for his beliefs. But these were very progressive beliefs that to us would seem quite normal. But during the time of the domination of the world by the Catholic Church and by the Holy Roman Empire, they were dangerous ideas and sometimes lethal. And so these professors were excited by those concepts of utopia and universal reformation and universal education and the power of science to change humanity. And science was considered a gift from God that would help us to understand all the amazing miracles that God had locked into creation. And we would learn to speak the language of nature, and then we would be able to produce great medicines and great wealth. And people got excited about that idea. And there were some brilliant young students among the classes of those professors. One of them was Johann Valentin André, who were almost certain wrote at least one of the first three Rosicrucian manifestos, maybe all three of them. Probably they were written with a small group of people, but those books were a combination of this, a new kind of esoteric approach to religion and Christianity, a political awareness and a great hostility toward the Pope, and a desire to free the world of that whole apparatus of the Holy Roman Empire. And also, though, they were witty and satirical, and sometimes that's missed. They almost at times take on a lampoonish quality. And I believe, along with some scholars today, that they were written almost like an outburst of enthusiasm, for the potential of the future, that came pouring out in the way that something like Allen Ginsberg's Howl or Kerouac's On the Road or something like that, just this passionate creation by young university influenced students who hope for this much brighter future. And when they came out, they were basically, the message, I believe, was create a universal reformation by starting with your own little corner of the world. And if enough of us do this, if enough of us create a universal reformation in our corner of the world, and we make everything better as much as we can, and we use science and we use spirituality together to do that, then we can actually have a much better life for all of us, and a world that has more liberty in it. So this got political, of course, and there were a couple of rulers, Rudolph, who was a Holy Roman Emperor and who was deeply into esoteric and occult matters, but who wasn't really interested in doing the kind of revolution that these younger people had in mind. And then his following him was a ruler who was the king of Bohemia, and the Elector Palatine Frederick, who was the great German prince that was interested in esoteric matters, was very young and had just married Princess Elizabeth, the daughter of King James of England, which was a court that was absolutely soaked in esotericism. And so people thought, wow, we've got Germany and England together. This is going to happen. We're going to fight a war against the Pope and against the Holy Roman Empire. Well, they did try to fight a war, but the defeat was almost immediate and catastrophic. And the whole Rosicrucian cause sort of, after at first causing this intense fervor in the world because people overreacted to it, and they wrote books and pamphlets, and I mean, hundreds came out in a matter of a couple of years, some of them against and some of them for, and all of them very misinformed and all of them missing the point. And so that ceased because all the hopes of this universal reformation were dashed as a 30-year war began instead. And many of the people that had been involved in these Rosicrucian ideas, who may have been Rosicrucians or who may have been people influenced by their ideas, they turned their attention to America. And they began the process of the very earliest times of colonization. And in the early days, there were even German pietists influenced by Rosicrucianism and by Jacob Boehme, who came to America and established some of the earliest colonies, like the town of Ephrata in Pennsylvania, and left a Rosicrucian imprint there. And there's rumors that can't be confirmed or haven't been confirmed by any real solid evidence yet, but they're persistent, that there were Rosicrucians who came with the missions, the Spanish missions that came up the coast of California, and especially in Monterey, there's said to be remnants of this Rosicrucian presence. So these ideas then proliferated through time, and in a slow way, but in an influential way. So by the 1800s, much later, we have someone like Paschal Beverly Randolph, who is presenting himself as a Rosicrucian and starts a Rosicrucian order that exists to this day. And this is extraordinary because this was a man of color who had experienced the worst kind of discrimination coming out of the culture when it was deeply involved in enslaving human beings, and he created a movement that continued and influenced successive generations of not just Rosicrucians, but organizations like the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor, and it continued through into the 1900s and survives to this day. So the Rosicrucian influence in America has been significant. And I could also, I don't know if you want me to go into that much detail, but for example, I'll just mention that the governor, the first governor and the founder of the Connecticut colony, was the son of the first governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, the first real Puritan presence in America. And this kid, John Winthrop the Younger, was an alchemist. He was deeply into esoteric ideas to the extent that he had brought over the famous esotericist John Dee's library and manuscripts, or significant parts of it, along with his alchemical gear when he came to America. And he was somebody who repeatedly went to Europe to try to find Rosicrucians. And when he was disappointed by those who were alleged to be such, he decided to just live his life as much like a Rosicrucian as he could, to be able to give people medicine and to not charge them for it. And he was very famous for the quality of his alchemical medicines, and served the whole area, like half the territory. And he was somebody who protected the weak. So there was a tribe that had been disempowered when they were decimated by the diseases that came over with the colonists. And the Mohicans were trying to take their land and were treating them like enslaved people. And so he stepped in, even though it was a great risk to himself and to Connecticut, and he protected this tribe, and he regained their property and their name. And so he tried to live Rosicrucian ideals. And I would argue that perhaps he was a Rosicrucian in the sense that somebody who is embodying those ideas is a Rosicrucian, whether they were initiated by some secret society or not.
Okay. Well, I know that there's a very well-known Rosicrucian order in San Jose, California, not too far from me, on Nagley Avenue. Are there others dispersed throughout the United States that people can actually go visit and buy books and have classes?
Yes, there's the two main orders. One that you're speaking of is probably the best known, and that's the one that was founded by Max Heindel, and who was a great author on esoteric subjects, fascinating character. And he has an Egyptian museum there, and there is also there was a facility, or is a facility, for healing, because their healing is spiritual healing, and they bring people there for free healings. And now there's another one called AMORC, AMORC. I believe it's still in Pennsylvania. And they also have a bunch of books by their founders, Swinburne, and they're a direct offshoot of Randolph, and publish some of Randolph's work. And then there's yet another smaller one that's more in Southern California. I don't think it exists anymore, though, because COVID was rather devastating for some of these smaller organizations that existed for some time. But when they ran into that, and I think also the earthquake codes in buildings in California caused them to face bankruptcy.
Yeah. You talk about in the book a place that's very dear to my heart that I visited only once in the, I don't know, mid 80s, and that's the Bodhi tree in Los Angeles, or was, I should say. So tell us about that and why that place was so special. The energy there was, you had to be a strong person to truly handle it. Tell us about the Bodhi tree and its importance in all of this.
It was something like an internet hub in when there was no internet. It was a place that was started by actual rocket scientists who had been working on weapons of mass destruction, and in the 1960s had this epiphany that they didn't want to be involved in that, no matter how well paid they were. And the thing that they noticed at the same time was that they could not get the books that they wanted to read. They were interested in Eastern philosophy, and they were interested in occultism and astrology, and books like that were very hard to find, even in Los Angeles in those days. Even finding a tarot deck was very difficult in most of America. And so they decided that for themselves and for their friends, they would open a little bookstore, and they would carry all of this. And so around the time that the Beatles were doing their last record, the Bodhi Tree bookstore was born, and it was a little stucco house on Melrose Avenue in West Hollywood, in a neighborhood that was mostly nurseries and lumber yards. And they at first had this like little poetry section, and they had a little section for religion and a shelf of stuff from the East. And I was actually there, not in the very first years, but I went there when I was a kid looking for certain poetry books that as a punk rocker, I felt I needed to have, like Patti Smith and Baudelaire and Rimbaud, and they did have them. But I was also really struck by all these different places represented on these bookshelves. Eventually, this became a big store with a second story that was filled with the little shelf of books from India became a whole section of the store with 2 or 3 bookshelves. And each room was this just magical collection of books on all such related subjects, from healing through any kind of spirituality you could possibly imagine. Huge astrology section. And they had this great table in the middle that when you first walked in, that had all the latest arrivals, and they had such great taste in books. They were constantly changing people's lives by getting the right books into people's hands. And they also supported a whole generation of craftsmen, because people who worked with crystals and people who made jewelry and people who made mandalas and all sorts of things, handmade stuff especially, they would carry in their gift shop. They became so popular that they were able to buy the little stucco house next door, and they called it the used branch. And and they filled that up with great esoteric books, and also with a room full of really high quality organic herbs, big jars full of them that you could get some from. And that store, both stores actually, they always had a cat, and the cats would eventually be buried under this tree in the back that had started as a small potted plant that one of the customers of the store had given them, and had grown into this giant tree, like the tree that Buddha had sat under. And then here these cats were buried one by one, generations of them. And by the 80s, which is when I spent most of my time there, they were super successful business and very influential, and you could go there at almost any time of day, and there were a lot of people there. And they started to put on lectures, and they were eventually famous because of Shirley MacLaine, who in her book Out on a Limb, and in the movie that was made from it, or the series, I guess it was, I'm not sure what it was, but the Bodhi tree was there, and she talked about how a book had fallen into her hands or something like that there. And so then tourists started coming. But when writing the book, I got to talk to a bunch of different people about the Bodhi tree. And what struck me was how they were so supportive of young publishers. Like the publisher of my books, Inner Traditions, they got so much help from Bodhi tree in their early days. Things like the Bodhi tree would pay to have their excess stock shipped back after a book show, or they would bring attention to their authors in some special ways. And they were so concerned with the well-being of the community, and they gave so much to it. It truly was a magical place that changed many, many lives. And it was such an amazing thing. You'd come in there, and the manager of the used branch had just come back from Tibet, where he had actually met the Dalai Lama and spent 3 weeks meditating at a high level with somebody else, and they tell you all about it, and then somebody else would have some strange story about that they had read in some antiquated book, and it was a fun place, really, really something else. But it was unfortunately the combination of gentrification and the online availability of books did it in. People started to find books there and then go home and buy them cheaper from Amazon. And the rent just kept going up, up, up. So eventually they had bought it. And then now the property tax kept going up, 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 as all the property around them became multi-million-dollar. And eventually it wasn't feasible anymore. So it went under. And it was a very sad, sad time. It was everybody who'd been there for so long and would come back and tell stories about it, just kind of standing around looking as the shelves dwindled and became empty.
Yeah, it was sad. I mean, to see it in its heyday and then to see it again, when it was on the downward end, it was, quite sad to see, but a blessing that it was there for everyone who had a chance to connect with it. Now, in your book, you talk about a very early feminist. She was called the Red Harlot, Frances Wright. Tell us about her, because when I read this, I was blown away. I didn't think any of this happened within this time frame.
I know. She's amazing, isn't she? She is a woman who was born in Scotland. And she tells the story of how when she was a little girl, she was in her grandfather's library. And, excuse me, she found a book that talked about America. And she was so thrilled by it, by the idea of this new continent and this dedication to freedom and the Constitution and Bill of Rights. And she said that she went around grabbing the atlases from his shelves, just praying that America was still there in them. And she was thrilled to find that the most recent still had it. Well, she wound up inheriting money when she was still very young, and she didn't really have any relatives to prevent her from doing what she wanted. So she did something that was kind of crazy. She and her sister just decided to go visit America. And so she got on a boat to cross the Atlantic, she and her sister. And the first thing she reported was that on this American ship, the sailors were all talking about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And they were basically intellectuals who had like little copies of the Bill of Rights in their pockets. And they were very patriotic about America and very thrilled about this great experiment. So she was thrilled. She compared them to like Athenians or something, like some golden age of human evolution. And when she got to America, at first, she found this everywhere. And she was so courageous that she and her sister, these young women, journeyed deep into America, into the most rural areas through wilderness, and met all sorts of people from all sorts of places around the world who were homesteading, and found that all of them were like these sailors. They were all people who wanted to sit down and have discussions about America and about liberty. And they were all informed about the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and George Washington. And again, she was thrilled. She felt that she had found here was the future of humanity in this superior society. And then she ran into the institution of slavery. And she was stunned and disillusioned and could not understand how a country with the ideals that she had found so far could possibly tolerate this. And it horrified her to such a degree that she basically dedicated the rest of her life to trying to find a solution to it, because she felt that this would destroy this country, that the great experiment would be ruined by this inexplicable act of savagery. And so the rest of her life, it starts out as this, she becomes this crusading feminist, super early abolitionist, giving speeches. She's tall and thin with kind of curly, wavy red hair. So they start calling her the Red Harlot, because any woman who would get up in front of a bunch of men and speak her mind is clearly needs to be called a harlot. But she was so eloquent and so moving, and her point of view was so incredibly progressive for that era, as she's talking about things like birth control, and she's talking about how women should be married for love, and they should be able to divorce men, and men should not be able to force anything on them, and all sorts of subjects that threatened the absolute dominance that men held at that time. But she found allies among men and among women as well. And at first, she was greatly celebrated. And even though there were articles written about her that condemned her and gave her nicknames like that, by the people of America and by a certain percentage of what was then the media, she was welcomed as this great admirer of American liberty and of the American experiment. And there were already people that agreed with her that enslaved people should be freed, and that something needed to happen to change the whole culture of the South, where this was particularly entrenched. She became friends with Thomas Jefferson and with Lafayette, and they were charmed, and they thought that she was a brilliant intellect, and she knew a lot, for example, about ancient Greek culture and the ancient Greek language, and this was an interest that Jefferson had. They were all old men at this point, but they kind of mentored her. Well, one of her ideas was to start a community, because she was told basically, we cannot free the people that have been forced to come here. What we have to do is we have to allow them to return home. But they can't, because they've grown up this way, and they would, it's not fair to send them back there. And so She tried to create basically a school, a ranch or a farm in which she could take people who had grown up enslaved and she could teach them the skills that they would require so that they could go home. And it did not work at all because, to begin with, Andrew Jackson, who said that he approved the idea, had her buy some land from a friend of his that was a swamp.
Aw.
And so from the start, she was doomed. And it worked at first for the first year or two, but when she left, her brilliant and dominant presence was gone, and her sister did not have the strength to prevent the thing from turning into the chaos of men who were trying to take control of it. White men who wanted to make the experiment somehow different than what she had envisioned. And to her credit, she made sure that everyone who had been enslaved, who participated, did find a new home in Haiti, and were guaranteed livelihoods and places to live. And but her health was destroyed, and also of her sister, because living in a swamp, they were constantly mosquito bitten, and they got fevers and became quite ill. The rest of her life is a sad tale of a bad marriage and alienation from her only daughter, and finally just utter loneliness. She was very disillusioned about the America that she saw happen, because, as she reported, even those great sailors and farmers who were so in love with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, she said that when she returned to America, something like 3-5 years later, that the country had become already obsessed with money and with industrialization, and they were idolizing a completely different kind of thing. And she, again, was deeply disappointed, because she had thought that we had a chance there to create something as brilliant as what Athens was at one time, and maybe influence future civilization that much. But she left this great imprint, and she also, through her grandchildren, had a big influence on New York City, because one of her grandkids, William Guthrie, was the rector at St. Mark's of the Bowery. And he was the guy that gave it the tradition that it has to this day of supporting counterculture and culture. So he had Khalil Gibran reading in his church. He had Isadora Duncan dancing in his church. He invited indigenous tribes to perform their traditional dances at his church. And then later in time, it became the place that Allen Ginsberg first read, and that Patti Smith first read, and where some really famous writers and dancers and all sorts of people got their starts.
It's interesting, as I listen to you talk, the theme, and you brought it up lately, is the white male that took control and ruled everything. Did that happen, in your opinion?
Well, it's there. There's a very crucial point there, I think, which is very early. And this is the story of a fellow named Thomas Morton, the pagan pilgrim. And what you have is the Puritans already established in America. It's just before the terrible triangle is established, but there is already a presence of slavery and indentured slavery in the plantations where tobacco is being grown already. And seeing that this could be a profitable thing, the other side of the English Civil War decides that we need to send a representative of us over there and start something, because we don't want the Puritans to control America. Especially if it's going to be something that's going to give us money. So the Civil War would eventually happen between these two types of people. The Cavaliers were ribald. They liked to drink. They liked women. They called it wenching. They usually had long hair and kind of the sort of musketeer beard and mustache, and they loved Shakespeare, and they liked ancient philosophers like Plato and Aristotle. And the Puritans, they wanted nothing but the Bible, books about the Bible, and Bible sanctioned poets, and you weren't to laugh, you weren't to run. Everything had to be very sedate and controlled, and it was quite different. So when Tom Morton arrived as a representative of the Cavaliers, he began to establish a trading post that was called Marymount. And this is a good example of him because it was, the mountain of Mary, the mother of God, but it was also Marymount as in a fun wenching, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he often used puns like this, often with these kind of sexual undertones. And he was very funny, and he like published the first fart joke and put it into something where he was talking about the Pilgrims. He called one of the leaders of the Pilgrims Captain Shrimp, and but he established this thing, and there were no walls, unlike the Pilgrim post. People were welcome at any time, day or night. He found that because he treated them fairly and showed interest in their own personal lives and their religions and their dreams and their history and what they knew about the local waters and plant life and all of that, that the local tribes were coming to him. They liked him. They trusted him. And when the weaker tribes asked him for guns, he sold them guns so they could protect themselves from the tribes that were trying to enslave them. And so he became an object of the hatred of the Pilgrims, both for his success and for their paranoia that he was selling them guns because he was going to lead a revolt against the Puritans. They started to harass him and to warn him. And at first he kind of laughed them off because he had a charter to be doing what he was doing, and he was a lawyer and knew he could defend himself back home in London.
Mm-hmm.
So one time he decided it was going to be May Day, and he decided that he was going to have this huge celebration like back home. So they felled this huge yellow pine, and they prepped it, and they made it into a huge maypole, and they put ribbons on it, and he wrote a funny bawdy poem that was pinned to the maypole, and they invited everyone to come and to have a peaceful time celebrating together on May Day. So he invited outlaws and traders and pirates and all the indigenous people, and he invited the Pilgrims, and of course, none of the Pilgrims showed up. And they said that it was this crazy, wild party of fornicating and drunkenness. And he says that quite to the contrary, that he found that the indigenous women were considerably more modest than the ladies back home. And that it was really a very civilized affair where everybody was so charmed by this unity within the diversity. Now, see, to me, that's the birth of America. In a weird way, right there. Everybody's invited, and everybody finds this wonderful unity in this mutual tolerance and affection for each other, and their desire to see each other do well. Well, that was even more threatening. And also to the Pilgrims, the Puritans, this maypole looked like a pagan celebration. A bunch of crazy pagans, including indigenous tribes armed with guns, were dancing around a maypole. This is some kind of preparation for a satanic upheaval and the destruction of the Puritans in their eyes. So they arrested him, and they were terrible. I mean, they starved him, they marooned him, they just did everything they could to get him to die of natural causes. But he somehow survived all this mistreatment.
No. Okay.
Yeah, and he went back, and they went back, even though he stayed quiet. There wasn't another May Day celebration. They eventually physically attacked him and burned down the trading post. The one thing I'll say about that was somewhat amusing in an ironic way was that they wanted the indigenous people to come see them burn it down. And the indigenous people knew that they were burning down shelter right before what was going to be a very severe winter. So they stood there laughing at the pilgrims for doing it.
Mhm.
Also, I must point out that Thomas Morton is somebody who helped people escape from being enslaved. That when people were condemned by the Puritan court to go work and die in the plantation, that he would, at great personal risk, find a way to help them to escape and get them out of that territory so that they wouldn't have that fate. So to me, he represents this entirely different kind of America. While they were afraid of the wilderness and wouldn't even go hunting for themselves when they were starving, he wrote down all the different kinds of spring water in the area and the incredible effects that it was said to have. Sometimes some made you sleep, some made you dream more vividly, some were intoxicating, some were good for healing people. And so I see there is where we first see, because the in the form of Captain Shrimp and the Puritans, you see the white man exerting this pressure that this first time that another white man, but one who is welcoming diversity, brings together the community. There stands a white man. And ironically, most of all ironically, the Puritans were the first to sue somebody and foreclose on their property. So in other words, Thomas Morton was the first person to ever be foreclosed upon by a corporation, because the Puritans were a corporation.
Wow, it's amazing how our history repeats itself and things that we didn't recognize or even know. Our time is like way over, and I appreciate you
Oh,
being with
sorry.
this long. No, no, it's great. I'm truly enjoying this.
Oh,
But
thank you.
I do want to cover one more thing before I let you go, and
Okay.
that is Arthur Evans in Z Budapest, the queer movement up in San Francisco.
Yes. Oh, I love Arthur Evans. I love Z Budapest. Yeah. There's a wonderful way in which the rebirth of witchcraft and paganism kind of coincided with the birth of liberation for lesbians and for the gay community. And both of these people are pivotal and early pioneers of both. And so first Arthur, who was a scholar really, as well as a great activist and somebody who fought all his life to support queer rights from all over the country, and also created these books and the experience of an actual live performance of the Bacchae of Euripides, and which he translated. And in his book about that, The God of Ecstasy, is this brilliant, absolute reformation of history about the ideas of what the witchcraft movement was. And in short, he believes that the old European witches that we read about in history were the survival of the ancient Greek pagan religions, specifically of Dionysus. And then he went further to use the Bacchae as a way of seeing how the suppression, to say the story briefly. So Dionysus is very feminine and dresses in long hair and women's kind of clothing and finery. And his enemy in the book is Pentheus, who's a very upright warrior man, very rational. He's a leader, an executive, and really a guy who doesn't believe in that kind of nonsense. And when the society that he rules over is disrupted by the arrival of Dionysus, he has Dionysus arrested. And Dionysus warns him against doing this. He'll be hell to pay, but he does it anyway. And there's an earthquake that frees Dionysus. And Dionysus then somewhat seduces Pentheus into taking his curiosity about what these women are doing when they run off into the mountains to celebrate the mysteries of Dionysus, to convince this straight guy to cross-dress as a woman. And when he does, he kind of gets into it, and he's like, do I look good? I look nice, right? But he has a tragic fate, because Dionysus takes him out there and then tells him where he should look and spy on his mother and her friends as they're doing these mysteries. And these women are in a frenzy at the time, and Dionysus shows them Pentheus spying on them, and he's murdered by his own mother. And he doesn't even realize that she's doing it because she's in the frenzy. And then Dionysus says this little speech about, this is what happens when you don't respect the gods. And so he used this book to reflect, obviously, on this problem in society between natural queer culture that's been there throughout history, and then the people who try to stomp it out for these weird religious or political or personal reasons. And then later, this developed into a much more serious study, even though that was very serious, obviously, but a really detailed scholarly book called Critique of Patriarchal Reason, which is this brilliant, and I highly recommend it, examination of the history of reason in the West and the way that it is absolutely warped our gender relations and the way that the different kinds of sexuality relate to each other and just everything about life. And he shows that it isn't a complete picture of the human experience, and he shows how distorted the people who produced these ideas were. And in fact, some of them being themselves closeted as they're creating these supposed scientific philosophies that were supposed to liberate everyone, but instead became an ideology that was used to oppress people that didn't conform. So that was Arthur Evans, some of him. I mean, there's a lot to say about him. And he was very involved in pagan practice and supported people who were interested in reviving the Dionysian and the witchcrafty kind of side of things. And then Z Budapest, she's amazing. A woman who was reading tarot in Los Angeles and was arrested, and she decided to fight. And she said, this is my religious belief. This is not a criminal activity. I'm not pretending to read fortunes. This is, you're stepping on my freedom of religion. And this became a cause célèbre for people, because all over America, there was struggles about licensing psychics or tarot readers and even astrologers. And sometimes there would be arrests, and people were afraid to practice these arts publicly. So the case actually turned into a kind of experience where, witches were showing up in tarot readers with signs to protest outside and to show support. And newspapers and magazines were writing about this and debating this idea that this is a kind of religious practice. And so she won. And her win changed the laws. So she also became a leader of a coven that was very, at first it was female only, because her feeling was that women needed to have a separate space in which to recover their spirituality, given that so much male toxicity is around them at all times, that without doing that, to just add a male to it would potentially be a disastrous mistake. Well, a lot of men took offense at that. And so there was this weird example, for instance, where there was a big festival that occurred, and Z and her followers were getting together to have an open meeting where people could join, women could join. And a bunch of these pagan husbands showed up and started grabbing their wives out of the circle because they were against women only. They thought it was discriminatory. And so the very group that was founded by Arthur, one of the fairy groups in the occult pagan gay arena, especially in the San Francisco area, they decided to protect Z and her friends and those who wanted to participate by creating a circle around them. But as I point out in the book, the awkward thing about it right away is what do you do? If you make the circle and you look at them or you're facing them, then they're being watched and encircled by a bunch of men. If you turn your back on them, then a bunch of men are standing there with their backs turned to the women. It just shows how awkward and awful gender relations, let alone dealing with tolerance and diversity, can get, even in progressive communities like that. And so Z eventually actually initiated some males, people that she thought deserved initiation and to a different level of priesthood, but some of her own followers were very offended by that.
Wow. Truly amazing. Folks, we've been speaking with Ronnie Pontiac. As you can tell, this is a man who knows his stuff, okay? His book is like, how many pages? Almost 600. And he just rattled everything right off that I've asked him about. So he is one of the few people that I have interviewed that really wrote their book and know their stuff. So history interests you at all, this is a book for you to read. If you have questions about today's society and the things that we are going through, this is definitely a book to give you a foundation of how we got to where we are today. Ronnie, could you leave us with a pearl of wisdom for the audience, please?
Oh, wow. Let me see. Yes, I will.
Okay.
This is from this is such an important idea from Bell Hooks. One of my favorite quotes. I am often struck by the dangerous narcissism fostered by spiritual rhetoric that pays so much attention to individual self-improvement and so little to the practice of love within the context of community.
Wow.
I just love that. And I think that's what made Bodhi Tree and the PRS the special places they were. They did that.
Yeah, they exemplified that. And hopefully the world can get to a point where we are sharing that type of energy with each other. Again, folks, Ronnie Pontiac, if you want to check him out online, just put his name in a search engine. He does have a search engine, I should say. He does have a wonderful Instagram page. And Ronnie, I found that you also do astrology.
I do. I do a weekly report that I release on Sundays, and sometimes I'll write about something that's going on that's interesting.
Yeah, and folks, he gives you an overview of the week and then a breakdown of what's going on in the heavens each day. It's truly worth checking out. Ronnie, thank you so much. Please come back anytime. Really
thank you.
Appreciate talking to you.
I would be happy to anytime. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. And to the audience, thank you for listening in. I'm truly honored and I appreciate your time and attention. And folks, remember, the most important choice that you can make is what you choose to make important. Consider making the masterful choice of rediscovering history and learning our truth. Abundant blessings, light and love to all. Agape.
If you've been the victim of a crime, it can sometimes feel like you've been left in the dark with nowhere to turn for answers or support. But help is always available, no matter who you are or what your background. Victimscharter.ie provides information on translation services, explains your rights, and offers the support you need when you need it most. You have rights, you have support, you have a voice. Find yours in the Victims' Charter, brought to you by the Government of Ireland.